What if history had a secret delete button?
And what if somebody hit it while standing in wet cement?
Tonight we're diving into a rabbit hole full of mud, mystery, and suspicious architecture.
Otherwise known as Tartaria. Allegedly. Maybe. Or not. We don't know. Don't sue us.
Welcome back to Everything's an Illusion, the show where we talk about what everyone thinks in their heads but doesn't voice, as well as those pesky conspiracy theories, with a questionable sense of humor and facts that may or may not have come from a Wikipedia page. I'm your host, Amethyst.
And I'm Mavic, your co-host, designated skeptic, and part-time architectural stalker of old buildings on Google Street View.
On this episode, we're exploring the alleged lost mega-civilization known as Tartaria, or the Tartarian Empire, plus the infamous mud flood hypothesis, suspicious star-shaped forts, and why some people think the world used to be one big steampunk Pinterest board.
Important disclaimer right up front. Everything we talk about today is alleged, unproven, or straight-up storytelling.
We are not historians, archaeologists, or time-traveling Tartarian city planners.
We're two weirdos with microphones discussing stuff from the internet. Interpret accordingly.
All right, quick warm-up question, Mavic. When you first heard the word Tartaria, what did you picture?
Honestly? A dessert empire. Like endless rows of fruit tarts ruled by a flaky pastry king.
I would totally pay taxes there, in whipped cream. So, big picture. In normal mainstream history, Tartary, or Tartaria, was just an old European label for a huge region across Central and Northern Asia, like Siberia, bits of Central Asia, around the Russian steppe. A vague, we don't really know what's over there blob on old maps.
Basically, the medieval version of that big area over there somewhere past where the Wi-Fi ends. A geographic shrug.
Exactly. But in modern conspiracy theory land, the story gets upgraded. In some corners of the internet, people claim Tartaria was actually a massive, global or near-global, high-tech empire that existed up until maybe the 1800s or even later, and then was allegedly wiped out, covered up, and erased from the official history books.
So the idea is, there was an advanced civilization building giant fancy structures all over the world, and then someone hit backspace on the whole thing.
Pretty much. Depending on which video or blog you land on, Tartaria allegedly spanned huge parts of Asia, Russia, maybe the whole world, built ornate architecture, domes, towers, and star-shaped forts everywhere, had free energy, wireless power, maybe some kind of ether tech, and then got taken out by a mud flood, like a global disaster that buried cities several stories deep.
So the pitch is, what if those buildings you walk past every day aren't just old? They're leftovers from a lost civilization that got mud-yeeted off the planet.
Exactly. And again, we're not saying that's true, we're just describing what people on the internet are saying, while we sit here very far away from peer review.
Let's talk about the mud flood, because that phrase alone sounds like the world's worst festival.
So, mudflood believers point to photos of old cities where you see buildings with basement windows at ground level or below, doors that seem half buried, streets that look higher than the original first floor. And then they go, aha! Proof that at some point a huge wave of mud rolled through and half buried these cities.
Whereas the boring mainstream explanation is more like, cities add fill over time. Roads get raised, foundations get rebuilt, people remodel. And occasionally, engineers just make weird decisions after lunch.
But in the Tartaria version, the mud flood is a global reset event. Something happens, no one agrees exactly what, and a giant surge of mud allegedly covers cities worldwide, wiping out Tartarian civilization. Then, the theory goes, the survivors or new rulers move into the half-buried buildings, claim they built them, and rewrite history.
So it's like the worst roommates ever. Not only do they move into your house, they also scratch your name off all your trophies and say they won.
Pretty much. And just to keep repeating this is a fringe theory. Historians and geologists don't buy that a coordinated worldwide mud event happened in the 1800s that somehow left no solid geological record, but tons of before and after photos only on YouTube.
Yeah, if mud had done something that dramatic, geologists would be all over that like cats on a warm laptop.
Now, the part that really hooks people, the buildings. Photos from like the 1800s and early 1900s show these gigantic, ornate structures with domes, spires, statues, super detailed stonework. And in front of them, you've got horse-drawn carts and a couple of confused dudes in hats standing in muddy streets.
And your brain goes, wait, these dudes built that? With no power tools? While wearing wool?
Exactly. So Tartaria enthusiasts look at this and say, these people were too primitive to build this. Therefore, someone else must have built it before, namely the Tartarians. They also point to world's fairs and exposition grounds, like the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, 1915, and other temporary fairgrounds full of monumental buildings. Conspiracy folks claim these weren't temporary at all, but inherited Tartarian cities that were later demolished to hide the evidence.
So the official story is, we built these grand exposition buildings out of plaster and staff, then tore them down after the fair. The Tartaria remix is, nah, those were ancient megastructures from a lost empire, and you bulldozed them to shut them up.
They also get very into star forts, those star-shaped fortifications you see on old maps in Europe, the Americas, and elsewhere. According to mainstream history, these were just really clever fort designs optimized for cannons and defense lines. But in Tartaria land, star forts get rebranded as mysterious energy devices, maybe channeling free power, or part of a planet-wide grid. Again, alleged, super alleged. Do not at your local fort guide with this, levels of alleged.
Hi, welcome to the historic Star Fort. Please don't lick the walls and ask if they're made of ormus.
Another big piece of the Tartaria puzzle is free energy. The idea is, see all those pointy towers, metal finials, onion domes, and decorative spires on old buildings? To believers, those weren't just aesthetic. They were allegedly antennae for some kind of ambient wireless energy system, like a planet-wide Tesla fantasy.
So instead of, this building has a fancy hat, it becomes, this building is a phone charger for the entire city.
Exactly. People point to churches and cathedrals with steeples, old government buildings with domes and spikes, even those little metal rods on rooftops. And then there's this narrative that we used to have clean, free, wireless energy. And then someone shut it all off and switched us over to coal, oil, and paying our power bill like chumps.
It's like the ultimate conspiracy. They turned off God's Wi-Fi.
Mainstream historians, engineers, and architects, of course, say, these are decorative, symbolic, or sometimes lightning rods. Please put your multimeter down and step away from the cathedral. And some commentators have nicknamed Tartaria theories the QAnon of architecture, because it's like a giant crowdsourced mystery narrative built mostly from memes, pictures, and vibes.
Honestly, if you told me QAnon, but make it aesthetic and all about buildings, that is exactly what this feels like.
Now, once you're in Tartaria TikTok or YouTube, the lore keeps expanding. It's like DLC packs for a video game, some alleged add-ons. Orphan trains, in the 19th and early 20th century, are reinterpreted as redistributing surviving Tartarian children after the mud flood. Weird gaps in city photos, very few people in huge streets, get framed as evidence the cities were newly repopulated. Rewrites of wars and disasters become cover stories for a much bigger reset.
In this version, history is basically one long, oops, we accidentally wiped an entire civilization. Better blame it on some other event situation.
Yep, there's usually a great reset woven in, not the modern buzzword, but an older alleged reset around the 1800s or early 1900s, where the old Tartarian system was wiped and our current tech and history started fresh. Again, these claims are not supported by mainstream scholarship. Historians point out that we actually have tons of documents, maps, and records of the areas labeled Tartary that show normal, messy human empires, wars, and culture, not a hidden global super-civilization that got memory hold.
But the theory keeps growing because it's modular. You can plug almost anything weird into it. Strange photos, odd architecture, old maps, and say, Tartaria did it. Quick origin story because I always like to know where these ideas start before they escape into TikTok.
So, according to researchers who've looked at this stuff, the modern Tartaria idea seems to have roots in Russian pseudohistory and nationalism. Several authors in the late 20th century started playing with the idea of a suppressed Great Tartary, or alternative timeline for Russian history. Later, the internet did its thing and stripped a lot of the specifically Russian context out. By the time it hits English-speaking YouTube and Reddit, you've got a more general, lost global empire narrative mixed with alternative architecture takes mudflood stuff, free energy speculation, and lots of image-based meme culture.
So we started with alternative Russian history and wound up with every fancy dome you've ever seen was secretly Wi-Fi.
Pretty much. And in the last decade or so, interest spiked online, with podcasts, videos, TikToks, Facebook groups, all discussing whether Tartaria was real, metaphorical, or just really committed fan fiction.
Okay, real talk. I get why people fall into this. You look at old photos, muddy streets, fragile wagons, and then these ridiculously intricate buildings. It does feel like someone copy-pasted a palace from another timeline.
Exactly. Some writers have suggested Tartaria taps into a kind of modern dissatisfaction. We look at bland modern buildings and think, wait, why were they making pretty things 150 years ago, and we get sad concrete boxes? So Tartaria becomes this aesthetic nostalgia conspiracy, a story that says, once upon a time, the world was beautiful, advanced, clean, and harmonious, and then somebody took that from us.
It's like a global version of my ex ruined everything, but the X is industrial modernity.
There's also something psychologically comforting about a hidden order. If history feels chaotic and unfair, conspiracy stories offer a narrative. No, there's a pattern. Someone planned this. Someone erased that. There's a story under the story.
Even if that someone is an evil global cabal of history editors with really strong shovels.
All right, let's intentionally step into what-if land for a minute. Again, this is pure imagination mode, not a claim of truth, but also not dismissing the possibility that history might have a few gaps wide enough to drive a horse and buggy through.
Welcome to Speculation Station. Population, us, and possibly an entire forgotten empire, depending on how tonight goes.
Imagine there was a civilization, call it Tartaria or something else entirely, that figured out how to harness some kind of natural atmospheric energy, build super long-lasting, ridiculously ornate structures, design cities with symmetry and purpose we barely manage today. Nothing sci-fi, nothing too wild, just knowledge we don't fully understand anymore, or techniques that never made it into the modern textbooks. Then picture some massive event, maybe natural, maybe human-caused, maybe something we don't have a modern comparison for. And suddenly, the world shifts. Cities get buried, populations scatter, and the knowledge base collapses. Later civilizations wander in, find these incredible structures, reuse them, renovate them, or build around them. And over a few generations, the memory of who built what blurs, changes, or gets replaced by more convenient narratives.
And honestly, history is full of moments like that. Civilizations rising, falling, getting absorbed, or misremembered. The idea that something advanced existed and later got forgotten isn't outside the realm of possibility. Humans lose knowledge all the time. I mean, we literally forgot how to make Roman concrete for almost 2,000 years.
Exactly. Add in global wars, territorial changes, lost archives, fires, floods, political shifts. It wouldn't take much for a lot of context to disappear, especially before everything was digitized and backed up on 5 cloud servers.
And in that scenario, you'd expect architecture that seems too advanced for its supposed builders, mysterious gaps in records, uneven timelines, a sense that things don't line up perfectly with what we're taught, which is kinda what people point to today.
Right, and it doesn't require a giant coordinated cover-up. Even small shifts in historical record-keeping, a few lost archives, or political rewriting could snowball into huge misconceptions over a century or two.
And if there was some ancient or pre-industrial technology, even something simple but powerful, like advanced masonry techniques or an early form of energy usage, it's not unthinkable that we might have lost it. Humans misplace knowledge like car keys.
Now, yes, if a global empire existed only a few hundred years ago, we'd expect hard evidence. But it's also true that tons of archaeological surprises get dug up every year, rewriting huge chunks of what we thought we knew. So is it impossible that something bigger existed and slipped through the cracks? Not really, just unproven.
So in this what-if version, we aren't saying Tartaria was definitely a global superpower with Wi-Fi spires and energy domes. We're just saying, if humanity has forgotten whole languages, technologies, cities, and cultures before, why couldn't something larger have slipped through the cracks too?
Exactly. History is huge, messy, and full of missing pages. If Tartaria represents one of those missing chapters, or even just a misunderstood era of architecture and engineering, the idea is worth exploring, not dismissing.
Speculation mode off, for now. So, if someone listening wants to explore Tartaria without immediately getting overwhelmed, or falling into a 3 a.m. research bender involving maps from 1798, how should they start?
First thing, treat this like historical detective work, not a debate. Instead of prove it's real or prove it's fake, try how much of this could be true and what evidence lines up. Because honestly, some parts of history are fuzzy. Maps changed names, empires got mislabeled, cultures got absorbed, and sometimes entire chapters get lost because a library burned down or a government rewrote its national story. It happens.
Exactly. It's not wild to think some civilizations might have been more advanced, more widespread, or just more interesting than we were taught. Humans forget things, a lot of things.
So here are a few ways to explore Tartaria without throwing your critical thinking into the mud flood. 1. Compare multiple sources at once. Watch Tartaria videos, then look at historical records of the same cities or buildings. Notice differences. Notice overlaps. Sometimes the truth sits somewhere in between. 2. Zoom in on specific architecture. Look at a building you find suspiciously advanced. Ask, when was it actually built? Is there documentation? Were parts added later? Does the official story feel incomplete? Because sometimes it is. 3. Be aware of narrative gaps. When official explanations say, we don't really know why they built it this way, or this was just decorative, that's often where alternative theories grow roots. 4. Recognize that lost tech is very normal. Romans had concrete we still can't replicate perfectly. Ancient cultures had machining techniques we didn't rediscover until the 20th century. Egypt had stonework that still makes engineers sweat. So claiming earlier civilizations had clever technology isn't a stretch. It's practically tradition.
And honestly, one of the biggest reasons Tartaria resonates with people is because it fills in emotional and historical blanks. We look at these massive stone structures and think, why aren't we building like this anymore? Or, how did they do this with what they supposedly had? Those questions alone make the theory worth considering.
Right. And even if Tartaria isn't exactly how the internet describes it, there might be kernels of truth, lost knowledge, misattributed constructions, forgotten cultures, or wiped out historical periods.
Which means exploring Tartaria isn't about proving a conspiracy. It's about being open to the idea that history is incomplete, and sometimes the pieces that don't fit are the most interesting ones. All right, lightning round, but this time with the understanding that some of these things could be misunderstandings, or they could be clues to something bigger. Question 1. Did Tartaria allegedly cover the entire world?
Some sources show it as a massive chunk of Eurasia. Some maps label huge areas Tartary. Whether that was a cultural region, a misunderstood empire, or something larger, that's still open for interpretation.
Question 2. Could the technology have been more advanced?
Possibly. History has plenty of examples where older tech surprises modern engineers. Some Tartaria theories suggest atmospheric energy, acoustics, or architecture beyond what we assume people used back then. Not proven, but not impossible either.
Question 3. Who would have erased it?
If anything was erased, it might not have been a sinister cover-up. It could have been political shifts, changing borders, nationalistic rewriting of history, or the simple winners write the stories dynamic. Empires collapse, records burn, cultures get renamed. It's normal.
Question 4. Is any of this confirmed by mainstream history?
Not really. Mainstream historians see Tartary as a geographic label, not a lost civilization. But that doesn't automatically mean deeper truths aren't hiding underneath the label. History is constantly rewritten when new discoveries appear.
Question 5. Why do people find Tartaria so compelling?
Because something feels off when you look at certain photos and structures. Because history has holes. Because we know ancient people pulled off things that even today make us go, how? And because the official story often leaves out interesting details.
Tartaria fills in a lot of those blanks. Is it literally true? Maybe parts of it. Maybe none. Maybe far more than anyone expects. But the curiosity is real, and that alone makes it worth exploring.
So to wrap it all up, Tartaria, whether it was a global empire, a misunderstood region, or a symbolic name for something bigger, gives us a chance to ask big questions about history, architecture, and how much of the past we've really lost.
We're not saying it existed exactly the way modern theories describe it, but we're also not saying it couldn't have roots in something real, something forgotten, misunderstood, or maybe intentionally rewritten over time.
If nothing else, Tartaria makes you look at the world with new eyes. Suddenly, basements look like buried floors. Domes look like energy receivers. Old photos feel like hints.
And that curiosity, that instinct that says, something doesn't quite add up, that's what makes history fun.
If you enjoyed this muddy stroll through forgotten timelines, follow us, subscribe, or send us your favorite strange building that just feels too advanced.
Next time on Everything's an Illusion, we might take on ancient giants, tree stumps that weren't stumps, or whatever else the universe throws at us.
Until then, remember, everything's an illusion.
And sometimes illusions are just history, waiting for a better explanation.